5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, stability in the Western Hemisphere is in jeopardy due to the political and economic pressures occurring in Venezuela. Misguided financial decisions, attacks on entrepreneurship, and socialist policies have led the economy in Venezuela to a free fall. While oil prices continuing to decrease, Venezuela is suffering from large budget shortfalls due to its large dependency on oil sales. To try to make up for the deficiency, the Venezuelans have a foreign debt of over $100 billion and have had to cut its oil shipments to some Caribbean and Central American nations. This paradigm shift can lead to an opening for the U.S. to get more involved in the region and deter the large democratic setbacks that we have experienced in recent years. Venezuela's economic crisis is combined with its political problems. And, Mr. Speaker, I rise to urge this body to stand in solidarity with the freedom-seeking people of Venezuela. Nicolás Maduro's intransigent, brutal regime continues to desperately and violently silence dissident voices who believe in freedom, in democracy, and in respect for human rights. Just last week, democracy advocate Maria Corina Machado was summoned to a kangaroo court in Caracas. This courageous woman, who was until recently a member of the Venezuelan National Assembly until she was illegally removed from her seat in Congress by the Venezuelan thugs. Why was she removed from that seat? Because she spoke up for the people of Venezuela. Before she was removed unjustly from her legislative seat, she was physically assaulted on the floor of the National Assembly. Yes, on the floor of the Venezuelan Congress, she was beaten up. Maria Corina, despite being banned from leaving her country, continues to use the power of her voice to spread awareness about the violence and the corrupt nature of Nicolás Maduro's brutal regime. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, her case is not an isolated incident. Earlier this year, savage repression met the thousands of students who peacefully demonstrated seeking a better Venezuela. Maduro, in desperation, used his National Guard and paramilitary forces to savagely quash the protests. During that time, innocent people were injured, arrested, and even killed. Unarmed demonstrators killed by Nicolás Maduro. 72 of those students remain in prison today, as well as 2 mayors who are in prison, opposition leader Leopoldo López, another brave voice for freedom like Maria Corina. Here's Leopoldo López. He remains in solitary confinement in Ramo Verde military prison under the poorest of conditions and without regular access to visitors, and all denying his due process. His wife, children, family, and friends are not allowed to freely visit him, Mr. Speaker. His cause caused international outcry from Amnesty International, stating that the charges against him are politically motivated and an assault on dissent in Venezuela. More recently, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions, along with that body's top officials, demanded the release of Leopoldo López, as well as the release of all of those who have been detained for exercising their legitimate right to express themselves freely. In response, the Venezuelan regime stated that the UN body's decision was non-binding on them, and so these innocent civilians remain in prison. The Venezuelan people have been met with intimidation, with violence, with imprisonment, for simply calling for respect for human rights and democratic freedoms in their own country. So the United States must stand with them in their struggle for freedom. That is why this body passed H.R. 4587, the Venezuelan Human Rights and Democracy Protection Act, in May, a bill that I authored. The bill targets Venezuelan officials or by denying them visas to enter the United States, blocks their property, freezes their assets, and prohibits financial transactions of these thugs responsible for committing human rights abuses against the people of Venezuela. I call on the Senate to pass the Venezuela sanctions legislation immediately to send a signal that these abusive tactics by the Maduro regime will have consequences. Mr. Speaker, the people of Venezuela are sending us a distress signal, and the United States must stand ready to act for the cause of freedom, democracy of our own hemisphere. Democracy leaders like Leopoldo